So, James, you're in Singapore. It's Monday morning UK time. Mikel Arteta spoke earlier on. So, what did he have to say? It's his first time he's really spoken since the end of last season, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of picking up the baton, isn't it, from last season? These sort of first press conferences. There are a few topics covered in terms of new signings. Obviously, they've got 5 players in. Madueke's not here. But there's a lot of sort of focus on Martin Zubimendi at the moment. It's obviously a bit of a coup to get him over the line. Liverpool very keen on him. Manchester City looked at him as well. So the fact that they've got him in, I think there's sort of high hopes for him. Obviously having a full pre-season. Madueke's not here because he's been involved in the Club World Cup. But Arteta talked well about the new signings and basically the idea that they can go one better this season, which is kind of the message that he's obviously been telling for the last couple of years. They finished second in the Premier League 3 years in a row now. And I mean, I sort of said to him, how much of your job is psychological as much as anything, because it's difficult, I think, for this group, maybe for them to feel that they aren't missing their opportunity, that, clubs all around them are winning trophies. Liverpool obviously won the league, but also teams that finished below them. Chelsea have ended the season with 2 trophies. Even Tottenham won, obviously, the Europa League. So, everybody around them's kind of winning the silverware. They're making the progress, but they don't have anything to show for it since the 2020 FA Cup. So he addressed that a little bit. He was in good spirits, I have to say, generally. I think he seems to be quite happy with the business they've done, and also hinting at some of the business to follow, which obviously would be Victor Gyokeres and getting that deal over the line and finally getting him part of the squad.
I mean, we've been on these tours many times over the years, and the plans are great, but things happen. There's always a saga about a sign that hasn't been done, that the managers want it to be done. You've got the director of football back in the UK, etc., etc. Is that where we're at with Gyokeres, or do you think it's closer than that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You're right about the sort of planning can go out the window. I mean, there was a really heavy kind of biblical rainstorm here this morning, which forced Arsenal to cancel training. So they weren't able to train as they would have liked to have done. I think they're going to try and train later today, although we're not sort of 100% on that. Actually, the club haven't made that clear. But either way, sort of not ideal preparation with a game against AC Milan in a couple of days' time. On Gyokeres, I think it's very close. The issue, really, they've agreed an initial fee, and that's around about 63 million euros. And then there's a 10 million euros set of add-ons, and the add-ons are the problem because Sporting want to make them quite attainable, obviously, because the easier they are triggered, the more money they get, whereas Arsenal want to kind of make them a little bit harder to kind of activate. So I think there's still some ground to cover on that. However, there are positive noises about him coming out at some point on the tour. They're here in Singapore for about a week. They then go to Hong Kong for 4 days before I think it's the 1st of August, they fly back. So there is a little bit of time out here. And I think the expectation is that he would be able to join for some portion of this trip, but they've got to get that final breakthrough with Sporting first.
Well, as we know, in the summer, fans get really annoyed when clubs don't do business. They get really excited when a player does come in, probably overexcited at times. But from Arsenal's perspective, once they get Gyokeres in, they've had a great summer. They've done all their priorities. They've probably got more players than people expected. So there really are no excuses if they get Gyokeres over the line. Everything they needed, they got. So is this the year? Is this the year that they finally get the title over the line?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I still feel that other teams are probably ahead of them. Because I think that you're right. If Gyokeres is done, and the expectation is that it will be, then you look at that front three, assuming everybody's fit, and you're talking about Gyokeres playing through the middle, Saka on one side, and probably Madueke on the other. Although I think as this tour goes on, we're going to try and learn a little bit more about exactly what the plan is for Madueke. I mean, obviously, he primarily played on the right, cutting in from that position, which is exactly what Saka does. But I don't think Arsenal are in a position to pay 52 million for an understudy for their best outfield player. So I think he's likely to start, in which case that's a big ask of 2 of your front 3 sort of coming in and gelling straight away to the extent that you can win a Premier League title. Obviously, Madueke knows the league, and Gyokeres has played in England before, but the fact of the matter is that's a big ask, especially when you consider that Zubimendi is going to operate as the six, and he'll be the sort of single pivot in this team, and that's a huge responsibility for him coming to a new league again. Obviously, acclimatising to his new teammates as well. So, it could all click, it could all come together, and they're already sort of talking behind the scenes here about how important squad depth and availability is. We know Arsenal had a lot of injury problems last season. That was a key part of why they weren't able to keep pace with Liverpool. So I think, if they can keep their players fit and are able to rotate at a higher level, I think Arteta's going to talk a lot about that over the next sort of 10 days, 2 weeks. This idea that, there shouldn't be such a big drop-off between the sort of first 11 and the sort of supporting cast. So, look, I mean, they're you would think on paper they're as best places they've ever been under Arteta to go and win the league. I still feel they've just got a little bit to prove.
Is Arteta happy to be in Singapore and Hong Kong? Because I know that in the past clubs have looked at trips to Southeast Asia. It's great for the commercial brand. There's many more fans in the Far East in the US, but it's a lot further away, so travelling is a bit of an issue. The climate is, as you found out today, unpredictable. A lot of clubs tend to sporadically go to the Far East because that's where it's harder to prepare. And we know that Arteta is a bit of a control freak. Is it a problem for him to be over there, or has he embraced it?
Well, I think the answer I'll give you today might be different to the answer at the end of the tour, because he was in very good spirits today. But we've only been here 24 hours, not even that when we saw him. So, I think they'd rather be in America, because we all know, obviously, they have American owners and they have a base in LA that really suits them. The Rams, the Cronkies obviously own the Rams, the LA Rams as well. They've got a setup out there, which is a training base, which is about an hour outside of LA, and it's like a home from home for Arsenal. And they've been there the last few years. They like the relative it's relatively secluded because of where it is. It's so far out of LA that I think they feel they can sort of crack on there. And yes, obviously they've got to do various commercial activities when they're in America, but they can sort of dip in and out of it. Whereas I think here it's quite suffocating. It's obviously, Singapore seems like not been here before, but seems like a fabulous city. But it is a city. They're staying in town. They sort of can't really get away from it. I know, having spoken to a few people at the club the last couple of days, that their commercial activity, their schedule is crazy. It's really, really busy for the first 2 or 3 days that they're here. They've got a lot of sponsorship activation to fulfill, a lot of media duties on top of that as well. So it is quite an intense period for them. But I think Arteta's long enough in the tooth to know that you can't go to America every year. They have to sort of spread it around a bit. They haven't been here for 7 years. And they were overdue a trip to this part of the world. So, as long as I think the weather doesn't disrupt their training plans too much more going on from here, I think he'd be relatively comfortable with it.
I was in Hong Kong, it was probably 10, 12 years ago. I think it was a Premier League trophy at the time, and the weather was that bad that the pitch at the stadium in Hong Kong was terrible, and they actually started painting the pitch green just to try and make it look better than it was. And obviously, I think it was Man City Sunderland who played that game, and City weren't happy about it, Sunderland weren't happy about it. Now, the reason I mentioned Hong Kong is because Arsenal played Tottenham in Hong Kong in probably about 10 days' time. And I know you were at Tottenham last week meeting Thomas Frank, his first press conference. You seem quite impressive from afar. So how did you take it, and what do you think Tottenham's prospects are going forward with Thomas Frank?
Yeah, I thought he was maybe a touch nervous. He didn't quite have the answer for everything in a way that I think sort of underlines the step up that he's making, really. There was quite a few times in that press conference that, he spoke very well because he always does, but there were a few times where he literally sort of said, "Oh, good question. That's something I need to think about." One of which was one of the questions that I asked him about who his captain's going to be, because there's a lot of speculation over Son Heung-min, whether he's going to stay even this summer. We know, ESPN, we broke that story a couple of years ago that there was Saudi interest in him, and that is still there. He's got a year left on his existing contract. And although he confirmed that Son and Christian Romero actually would both captain the sides each for 45 minutes at Reading, which is what happened the other day, he refused to say whether he decided if Son would stay as club captain. And that obviously is quite a significant story, given He's been there a decade. He's just finally won his first trophy. He will go down as a club legend, and and arguably he's in that position where he could dictate what he wants to do. Should he leave the club on his own terms after everything that he's done for them? So, there's some big issues rumbling on in the background. Romero's another one. We know that Atletico Madrid are interested in him. Spurs don't want to sell him, but there is a suggestion that maybe the player is unsettled, and it remains to be seen just how much he wants to try and force through a move, and that could be a big problem for Thomas Frank. In the same way, of course, that Ange Postecoglou, when he came in his first summer, he lost Harry Kane the day before the season starts. So I thought he handled everything generally quite well, but it is a strange situation for him to be going into. Normally you go into a club as a new manager with the club being a sort of complete mess, whereas obviously he's taken over a team where there's a real mixed feeling among the fan base at the moment, because they've just won their first trophy in 17 years, yet they had their worst Premier League season ever. And, there was such an outpouring of sort of positive emotion towards Postecoglou from many of the players on social media that he has got a bit of a battle there just to establish himself. And I think if you then on top of that add in the fact that he's obviously moving to a bigger club, a less stable environment, going from Brentford, where he ruled the roost and had been there many years, to Tottenham, who I think had sacked 5 managers in the time that Thomas Frank had been at Brentford. And again, there's been a lot of change at the top of the club. Van Ketchum's come in as the new CEO, been a bit of a reshuffle behind the scenes in terms of the hierarchy above him. So it's a big challenge for him. And it was funny that he asked us actually what the odds were of Tottenham to win the league. And none of us knew off the top of our heads. And right at the end of the press conferences, we were getting our dictaphones and walking back. I looked it up and I told him, I said, it's 66-1. And he said, where does that put us? And I said, you're 7th in the betting. And he said, all right, okay, well, maybe I'll have some each way money on it. Obviously, he was joking. He can't bet. He knows he can't bet. But I didn't have the heart to tell him that Manchester United were 40-1.
I heard him say that there are 3 teams ahead of us right now, and I'm thinking, sorry, what? You finished 17th in Premier League last season. What's happened this summer? You brought in Mohamed Kudus, and you might be getting Morgan Gibbs-White. So what makes you think there's only 3 teams better than you? So maybe we should park that a little bit.
I can tell you that because that was my question. One of my other questions to him was, we were just talking about, he was trying to get this idea across that Spurs have got to be capable of competing on 4 fronts. And I think that is quite a significant messaging behind the scenes. That was one of the reasons why probably the main reason that Postecoglou lost his job, was that he had made a judgment call in January last year that they could only win 1 trophy and they could only prioritise and concentrate on 1 competition. And fundamentally, the hierarchy at the club disagreed with that. They believed that squad was good enough to be able to not just sack off the second half of the Premier League season. And I think it's significant that Thomas Frank is already talking about almost framing success in the terms of competing across 4 competitions right the way through to the end. Now, those 3 clubs, I mentioned to him, well, how difficult is it going to be to compete on those 4 fronts when you look at Liverpool, you look at Manchester City, you look at Arsenal, and you look at the money that they're spending in the market. And he said, well, those 3 clubs are a bit ahead of us at the moment. And it sort of took me back to this. I feel like this is a sort of cyclical thing that so many Spurs managers end up talking about. Antonio Conte used to talk about it all the time, which is the gap between Spurs and the top sides, and how big it is and how far away they are and how many years is it going to take to bridge. It feels like it's the perennial problem for Spurs, and it's now Thomas Frank's. It's the one that he's inherited, and it's the one that he's going to have to try and close. So
we know that they're trying to sign Morgan Gibbs-White from Forest, and that is in a bit of a legal logjam right now. So who's your money on? Daniel Levy or Evangelos Marinakis? 2 guys who are, very, very happy to, go the legal route, be very hard. So it's tough. That's almost like, Usyk versus Fury, isn't it? That's a big one, that one.
It really is. It's to the extent that I kind of want to bottle the answer so that I don't irritate one of 2 of the most litigious and difficult men in football. No, I mean, ultimately these things tend to come down to the player, don't they? If Morgan Gibbs-White really wants to move to Tottenham, he'll probably move to Tottenham. But it might have to get quite ugly before that happens. I think he clearly does want to go to Spurs. I suspect the deal will probably happen, but who knows when the lawyers get involved, and Marinakis is not one to back down in these situations. So yeah, it could become very protracted and very difficult. But you just sort of think eventually the club probably has to think, well, if the player doesn't want to be here anymore, is there any point keeping him against his will? I mean, what are we really going to get out of him? How much is he really going to be able to deliver? There are obviously players who've been denied moves in the past and they've been able to knuckle down and get on with it. I'm not saying Gibbs-White can't do that, but it just casts a real doubt over the club that obviously they're going into Europe this season. They don't need this kind of distraction and the message that it sends to the rest of the group, really, that you've got one of your talismanic figure who doesn't really want to be here, but he's still here. I don't know. It just feels as though if Gibbs-White really agitates for the move, I think he'll get it.
So we've just one trophy-winning London team. On to the next trophy-winning London team. And Chelsea. We both celebrate Chelsea at the Club World Cup, the new world champions. Obviously, they're on a bit of a well-earned break right now, which is obviously why Madueke is not good away with Arsenal. So where do you stand with Chelsea? I was really impressed with Chelsea in that final against PSG. I didn't see that result coming. I don't think anybody did. But I think on that occasion, we saw Maresca had a plan. He was pragmatic. I think João Pedro's been an outstanding signing. Delap looks a decent bit of cover as well. So all of a sudden, Chelsea certainly got a 1-11 that could compete. But beyond that, have they got the squad that can compete for the title and make it a four-way title race?
It's come at a high price, that Club World Cup campaign. The positives are obviously that they won it, but the fact that they beat PSG in the way that they did, I think, was a real validation for Enzo Maresca, because it's easy to forget that despite the fact that they won the Conference League and qualified for the Champions League, he ended last season with quite a significant chunk of the Chelsea fan base not entirely convinced that, in what he was doing, that they didn't really feel that necessarily the style of play, the sort of possession-based, sometimes felt a bit ponderous, a bit aimless style was not really yielding the kind of performances and results that the fans wanted. So I think it's a real shot in the arm for Maresca. The fact is, of course, that during that Club World Cup, he'd been experimenting with Cole Palmer in different positions. He tried him out on the right, he tried him out on the left. And the fact that in the final, he was so effective on the right, cutting in, that again is, it just shows that maybe Maresca's come up with something that could really help Chelsea going forward. But it's a huge ask. We know that Chelsea have tried to, they've lobbied and asked the Premier League to push back their opening game because they know that they're going to be undercooked for it. That request has been rejected. My understanding is that Chelsea won't go away again now. I think they're just going to have a training block at Cobham and try and go into the new season as best they can with that under their belts. But it's difficult, obviously for City to some extent as well, but for Chelsea to play basically for another month in the climate, in the difficult conditions that you and I both experienced and wrote about, to ask them then to go into a 9-10 month season with sort of a fraction of the rest that the other top sides have had is a big challenge. And then you add in the fact that they were able to rotate their entire side in the Conference League last season, which they're not going to be able to do in the Champions League. You're not going to be able to have Cole Palmer sitting out of the whole 8 group stage games of the Champions League, which is, of course, what they did in the Conference League. So that is a huge step up. And I just feel as though the demands on a young squad, although they've done some really good business, and yes, they do look a lot stronger, to go from where they were to suddenly winning the league feels like too big a step this season for me.
Now, we know they've brought a lot of players in. There's going to be players going out as well. Madueke's gone out. I'm sure Raheem Sterling will go, the forgotten man at Chelsea. The one that kind of intrigues me is Nicole Jackson, because despite the fact he can be quite unpredictable and erratic, he scored a lot of goals last season, but obviously Delap's come in, João Pedro's come in, they brought in Jamie Gittins out wide as well. So do you think Jackson will be at the start of the season? There's been a link with Man United, which again is probably because United need a striker, but he looks like the one player that could leave, having had a good season last year.
Yeah, I don't think Jackson wants to go, and I think Chelsea would be prepared to plan with him. I think if he was still there on September the 1st, I can't see him being part of a bomb squad like there was last year, where it's like, these players are not part of our setup. You literally saying to them, go and find a move because you're not going to play here. I don't think that Jackson would be in that position. I feel as though they've invested quite a lot in him, sort of not just financially, but sort of emotionally and in the coaching work that they've done with him. And, Maresca would talk him up a lot about how good he is off the ball, what they lose particularly in the press when he's not playing, that I just sort of feel as though to sort of jettison all together would be quite a surprise. But at the same token, they've signed 2 forwards. João Pedro is clearly going to be the one who's starting next season in attack, and Liam Delap, I think, is occupied that position that Rasmus Højlund probably should have done at Man United, which is he's gone in as probably their longer term number 9, but he's not going to play every week. He won't be exposed to that sort of scrutiny and pressure, and he'll be allowed actually a bit of space and time to develop, sort of in João Pedro's slipstream, if you like. So where does Jackson really fit into that? I mean, with the volume of games, I'm sure he'll get some game time, but it will probably come down to whether Nicholas Jackson wants to be second or third choice, competing for that position, that one position up top.
Now, I think we're going to have to let you go. You've got an Arsenal kit launch in Singapore, so obviously get ready for that. Extra large, I take it. Is that what you're asking for?
Easy, mate. Easy. I did. I have eaten a bit over the summer, but that's because we're in America having the big meals. I'll get back in the gym. Don't worry.
Well, let's just pick up on what myself and James were talking about at the end there about Nicholas Jackson, Chelsea, and Man United. Rob, we know that United have looked at a centre forward this summer. They missed out on Liam Delap, and they've since brought in Matheus Cunha, and also Brian Mbeumo is pretty much done, we think. It looks to me like midfield is the option, is the area they need to strengthen, because I think Ruben Amorim said at the weekend after the draw against Leeds that he needs people in midfield that can cover the pitch. So that was a kind of a cry for help in many ways. But is Nicholas Jackson a prospect, or do you think they will start looking at other areas of the pitch before they readdress that centre forward option?
Yeah, I mean, really, you just touched on United's biggest issue there, that you can probably go through every area of the squad and say that they need an upgrade, and that the problem is that you just can't do all of that in one summer. And everyone will know that United's finances aren't in the best shape possible, that they've spent money on Cunha and Mbeumo, trying to solve that issue that they had last season with scoring goals. Obviously, Ruben Amorim has targeted that area as his kind of priority. I think me and you both got told sort of earlier in the summer that, while there was sort of talk about all the targets and things, that they were desperate to get that Brian Mbeumo deal over the line before they started looking at other areas. We think that is now done, so they can start kind of looking at other positions. Clearly, they need a number 9, and I don't think anyone would argue that Rasmus Højlund and Joshua Zirkzee, in the form that they showed last year, are good enough to lead the line for Man United. You mentioned there that they missed out on their top target in Liam Delap, so they are kind of looking at other options. I don't think that Nicholas Jackson would kind of ignite the Man United fan base particularly. It would feel like just another body in that position. Again, there you've touched on the midfield. You're right. I mean, it's all very well kind of trying to solve your goal scoring issues, but at the moment, your midfield 2 are going to be 2 of Bruno Fernandes, Ugarte, and Casemiro. And we've seen time and time again last season and beyond, the United just get run through so often. So, it has been a positive start. I would suggest it's been a positive start for Man United. Something they've got 2 key targets through the door, but clearly they need more if they're going to, start climbing the Premier League table and get up towards those European positions next season.
I mean, United already spent, I think it's about 110, 120 million on Cunha and Mbeumo. They've also brought in the fullback from Paraguay as well, Diego Leon. But I've just been doing the sums this morning in terms of what the Big Four, I'm going to call them the Big Four now. Sorry, don't take offence, Man United fans, but the Big Four are the teams that finished the top 4 last season. And they're called the Big Four now because the spending is done this summer. So Arsenal have done, by the time they bring Gyokeres in, they've done £180 million this summer. Chelsea, £142 million this summer, plus 12.5 they spent in January. Liverpool, now they've got Ekitike over the line, £254.5 million in one summer. And Man City have done £120 million this summer, but on top of the £175 million they did in January, they've done £295 million worth of strengthening in 2025 alone. United are falling way behind, aren't they? I mean, United are spending money not even to keep up, just to stop falling behind. It's a strange summer, but they spent a lot of money, but they need to spend probably twice as much to come even close to having a hope of catching the top 4, the Big Four, I want to call them.
Yeah, I mean, the key now for them is to get the lads out the door that Amorim doesn't want. I mean, Rashford will join Barcelona. I think it's quite a big win for United. It looks like Barcelona are going to cover all of his wages, but they're not going to get a huge fee through the door that they could sort of reinvest in the squad. They need to get Antony out. They need to get Garnacho out. Sancho is another problem. I think if they can do those departures well and bring some money in, then you may find that there's money there to maybe bridge the gap with those 4 clubs that you've just mentioned. Maybe they find money for a number 9. Maybe there's a little bit of money available for another central midfielder. But you're right. I mean, the worry really is Liverpool, I would suggest. Liverpool are the Premier League champions. And we've seen sometimes that you get champions who kind of stand still, don't you? They kind of just, not rest on their laurels is the wrong phrase, but, they kind of assume that squad that have done so well the previous season will do so again. And they haven't. They've just gone and spent a load of money on really kind of established players from big European clubs. And when you look at that and you think that Man United really should be sort of looking at every season challenging or trying to get sort of the top positions of the Premier League, and you look what Liverpool have done on the back of winning the Premier League and being one of the best teams in Europe last season, I would suggest that, like you just said there, that gap is massive now with Liverpool, particularly if the likes of Wirtz and Frimpong and Ekitike all hit the ground running. I mean, that squad, Beth, is formidable now, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's on paper, it's a really impressive squad. And, perhaps the spending isn't done yet, particularly if there's some outgoings, as we expect there will be. I think the one thing that you will say is, you say, if those players hit the ground running, and I suppose that is the caveat. And, Liverpool in the past have been criticised for the lack of spending. You only have to go back to last summer when they only spent 12 million on Federico Chiesa, and people were saying, oh, well, surely they're not going to do particularly well this season because they've not brought in any more bodies, and then they go on and win the Premier League at a canter. So it's not too often that Liverpool, to the last 10 years or so, have won the transfer window as such. I'd say probably as things stand, they have this summer, but whether that translates to success on the pitch, Manchester United know all about spending big and that not quite working out. So it's not a guarantee of success. And it's obviously more about finding the right players. And, I think both Cunha and Mbeumo are both really, really good players who were linked to Liverpool at various points. And I suppose it's whether they gel and whether they hit the ground running as well. So it's hard. I think, obviously, Liverpool are in a really strong position at the moment, but it all comes down to coaching, to injuries, to how all of these players hit the ground running. So, I mean, I think sort of from the outside looking in, United have done some good business already, but as you mentioned, they've got a lot of players there that they could do with offloading to get those extra funds through the door.
Rob, obviously we discussed the midfield situation, and I know they've looked at Ederson at Atalanta. We know that Morgan Gibbs-White is available for £60 million at Forest because Tottenham have triggered his release clause, but that's still kind of bogged down by legal issues. I mean, beyond Ederson, do you think there's anyone out there that United are in a decent place to sign, or are they just scratching around as they usually do this time of the window?
And I think the one aside from Ederson at Atalanta, who they've looked at, the one that would like is someone like Adam Wharton at Palace. But you just, I mean, in terms of fit and what United are looking for younger Premier League proven players who play well in that Amorim system. I mean, Cunha was identified, obviously not just because he's scored goals in the Premier League, but because he thrived in that, a similar system at Wolves last season. So they know that he can do the job that Amorim wants. I mean, Wharton is playing in one of those, or was playing in one of those deep line midfield roles in a similar system under Glasner at Palace last season. So he's the one of the ones that they would look at as, their ideal. But the money that it would take to get him out of Palace is probably beyond Man United at the moment. And it's a big shift for United, that, because in the past, and you'll know, as well as I did, because you covered United when Fergie was in charge, that historically under Fergie, United could go to big Premier League clubs and just take their best player. And I think in, the likes of Michael Carrick when they signed him from Spurs, he was a terrific player for Spurs, and he was in the England squad. United needed a midfielder, and United just went to Spurs and said, right, we're taking him. And that they just can't do that anymore. And Palace is a good example of that, because Adam Wharton, he would cost an awful lot of money to get him out of Palace. Palace are in Europe next season. Obviously, we don't really know what competition they're going to be in because of the issues they're having with that. But United just aren't in a position to go to clubs like Palace anymore and saying, right, we're going to take your best player. And it's a real problem, because then you end up scratching around the European market in that kind of 30 million to 40 million bracket. And any player you sign from that bracket is a huge risk. And we've seen time and time again that United have tried to to go into that market and sign players, and it's just not worked out. And I think United are quite cautious about that, or are going to be quite cautious about that for the rest of the summer, because what they can't afford to do is make any more mistakes. And I've said this on the pod before, that when Edward was in charge, he used to say that any transfer is a risk, and they would look to get around 70% of their transfers right. So that means that 30% they knew that just weren't going to work out. I don't think that United are in a position even to work to those numbers anymore. They're in a position where they have to, every player that they bring through the door in terms of transfer fee, wages, ability, quality, all these things, everything has to be perfect to get United back among the likes of Liverpool and City, Arsenal and teams like that. Otherwise, you could be looking at Man United. If they get these transfer decisions wrong between now and the end of the summer, and it doesn't work out for Amorim, and Amorim has to go in, say, November, you could be looking at Man United becoming periodically a sort of mid-table side, because they just can't get themselves out of that group of clubs that includes really, really well-run clubs like Brighton, Brentford, Bournemouth, and Palace. So it's going to be really tricky for United now, and to see what they can do just to make up that ground with the team that they think they should be challenging with.
It's been a while since they got 70% of the transfers right. I'm not sure.
And that's what I'm getting at. That they would kill for 70% right at the moment.
I think they probably even get 30% right. I think even if you switch it around, I think that's still seriously. I mean, over the last 10, 12 years, there's been very, very few, apart from Bruno, perhaps, that have actually, been good sides. I just want to ask one question about outgoings, Robert. I know we know the 5 players that are on the list and can go. I was watching the game against Leeds at the weekend, and the midfield was an issue. And when Kobbie Mainoo came on in the second half, I thought, he just doesn't fit the system. He can't get around the pitch. And I know a lot of United fans last year were up in arms when it became clear that United would actually listen to offers for Kobbie Mainoo. Do you think there's a possibility that he could go this summer? Because he doesn't fit the system. And, you have to wonder whether keeping him at the club because he's a homegrown player is a kind of it's almost like the worst decision if he's not cut out for the squad.
Yeah, I mean, nothing would surprise me with Man United this summer. And then the messages that we got from Man United right at the start of the summer was that they couldn't be firm about the future of any player. And that included at one point Bruno Fernandes. And that tells you what kind of position they're in, because Bruno is by far United's best player. He's their most important player. And they were still willing to listen to offers for him at the start of the summer before he said that he was staying. So, again, historically, would United want to listen to offers for a young English homegrown player who is in the England squad? No. But we're talking about a different Man United now. With Mainoo, there hasn't really been much progress with his contract negotiations. I know that he wasn't particularly, or him and his representatives weren't particularly thrilled with some of the stuff that came out in January, that United were willing to listen to offers for him, and there was talk of Chelsea, and they didn't really know where that had come from. They weren't thrilled really, because Kobbie Mainoo is born in Stockport, grew up in Stockport as a United fan, has come through the academy. He wants to play for Man United, and it's difficult for him to be listening to all this kind of stuff. Maybe he has to be offloaded to kind of fund another rebuild. I think you're right in what you say about the system. I don't really know where he fits in that system. Is he one of those deep line 2 midfielders? Is he one of those, further forward, those number 10s essentially? Well, if you look at the squad now with Cunha and Bremo, there's not really room for him as one of those 10s, because I think you would assume it's going to be Cunha and Mbeumo. I would put Mason Mount in the same bracket. Where's he going to play in this system now? It wouldn't surprise me if someone came in with a big offer for Kobbie Mainoo and he was allowed to leave, or United at least listen to it. Do I think that United are going to get the offer that would make them tempted to accept it? Probably not, because he's not coming off the back of a fantastic season. So the simple answer is I don't know. I think that every Man United player, in terms of kind of how the club are looking at them, will have their price, because they haven't got any other option apart from to look at ways of kind of generating funds and churning the squad essentially.
So we're going to move on to Liverpool now, and obviously, Beth, before we discuss the summer transfers, we have to say it's been a really challenging summer for Liverpool. The tragic loss of Diogo Jota. I mean, how did Liverpool move on from that? Because it's affected the club in so many ways, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch, psychologically, in many ways. So how do they move on?
It's such a difficult one. And to be honest, I don't think we'll fully know how well Liverpool are able to move on until a season has started. I wasn't at the first friendly of the summer against Preston the other week. I was out in Switzerland, but sort of looking back on the footage of that, it was quite clear that a lot of the players before the match and at the end were just devastated. And, the fans were singing Jota's song for about 10 minutes at the end of the match, and the players were just stood, looking back at them and obviously really appreciating that support. But it's so difficult, and it's such a difficult balance to strike. There's no real sort of handbook for how to deal with something like this, of this magnitude. I will say, I think the club have dealt with things in the best way that they possibly could have done. I think the way that they've handled everything in terms of the timing of things and sort of giving things a chance to breathe, and obviously sort of liaising with his family, who are obviously the most important thing in all of this, the most important people, has been great to see. But obviously it's a devastating situation. And first and foremost, they've lost a great person. He's someone who was adored by not just his teammates, but the staff and people around the club and the training ground. They've lost a friend and an excellent human being, and I think recovering from that is really difficult. And then obviously you have the player as well, because he was probably Liverpool's most clinical finisher. Didn't have his best season last season. Again, was struggling with an injury that I think, to be honest, we didn't all really know the full scale of until a few months after the injury had actually happened. So I think that definitely affected him. But there's no doubt that he could still have had a massive part to play for Liverpool this season. So yeah, it's a really tough one. And I think the one thing I will say is that, this group of players, they're really together, they're really united. I think this will have brought them closer together, and I think they'll be even more determined to go out and win and do well for Jota and in his memory. But again, it's grief isn't a linear thing, and I suppose we'll only find out once the season starts what effect that does have on everyone at the club.
I've got to say, I think Arne Slot's handled it so well. His statement before the Preston game, when he basically said, look, everyone deals with it differently. If people want to play, they can play. If they want to train, they can train. If they don't want to play, they don't have to play. Everyone will take it differently. And I guess it's a day-to-day thing, and day-to-day, week-to-week, game-to-game. But obviously, Liverpool have to move on, and we know that they've arrived in Hong Kong on their pre-season tour. They've got a few new recruits. Florian Wirtz, obviously the club record signing, and as we speak, I think that Hugo Ekitike is pretty much done. So they've really, really blown their rivals out of the water this summer. So, I mean, how have they done that? Because Liverpool in the past under FSG have been very kind of conservative in their spending. When they brought in Van Dijk and Alisson, that was with the Philippe Coutinho money. It wasn't just money they plucked from nowhere. So what's happened? Why have they suddenly gone big and gone for broke on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think Liverpool are financially in a really strong position. They haven't, unlike some of the rivals, had any sort of PSR issues to navigate over the past few years. They're in really rude health. They were obviously back in the Champions League last season, so all of the revenue that comes with that is sort of boosted the coffers a little bit. And also, they didn't spend. You mentioned sort of the money that at the top of the show that City spent back in January, and that club spent last summer as well. Liverpool only spent the 12 million on Chiesa, and as I said earlier on, that turned out to be a wise decision because they had a squad capable of going on to win the Premier League. But they obviously feel now that it's the time to sort of reshuffle and bring in some top quality players who the manager really, really likes. And yeah, so that I think the lack of spending in previous windows has certainly helped them. And I think sort of going back to the point that Rob made a little bit earlier on as well, like I think Liverpool are now in a fairly new position where they're right near the very top of the food chain. And obviously Liverpool have always been a big club and have always had a draw. But, it's always felt like that there were probably 3, 4, 5 other clubs ahead of them in the pecking order for these top players, the likes of Florian Wirtz. You can't imagine a player maybe of that caliber, even 5 years ago, choosing Liverpool over, say, Bayern Munich or Real Madrid or whatever. But I think now Liverpool are in a position where pretty much any player that they approach, they're in a really strong position to be able to bring them on board. And, with the Ekitike move, Newcastle, we know, were really interested. I think they got up to 70 million for him in the end. But as soon as the player knew about Liverpool's interest, he instantly wanted to go to them. And so that has really helped them. And they've got some real pulling power now which coupled with their sort of the shrewd business the past couple of years has put them in a really strong position.
Beth, can I ask just on Liverpool's summer? I think from the outside, obviously you'll know better than me and Mark, but from the outside there has been a little bit of surprise about, not that they've signed players, because obviously you mentioned there that they didn't spend an awful lot last summer, but the extent to which they've spent this summer, is there any surprise to you that they've gone so big in terms of the money they've spent, particularly because, I mentioned before, you're coming off the back of Premier League champions, that it would have been very easy for Liverpool to sit and say, well, we've actually got a lot of the pieces that we need here anyway. We only need like one or two tweaks. I just feel from the outside, particularly like speaking to people around sort of Man City and Man United, there has been a bit of surprise about just the amount of money that they've been able to spend and the quality of player that they've brought in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of out of character a little bit in terms of them spending all this money in one go. So yeah, I have been slightly surprised by the scale of it. Although that being said, it was quite a strange situation last season, because Liverpool obviously won the league at a canter, but yeah, it still felt, certainly from sort of March, April time onwards, that this was a squad that still could be improved massively, which is quite rare when a team is doing so well in the league. So it did feel like there were certain puzzle pieces that could sort of be put into place, and players that could be improved upon. I think the one thing I will say is that, you know, FSG have been criticised in the past for lack of spending, but they haven't ever really been afraid to put money on the table when they feel a game changer is available. Now, obviously, Mark's right. The Alisson and the Van Dijk signings, you know, two of the most expensive signings in Liverpool's history, they were both made possible because of the sale of Felipe Coutinho. But even sort of, you go back to the Moises Caicedo saga a couple of summers ago, Liverpool were prepared to pay a British record fee for him. Obviously, ultimately, the player went elsewhere, but that money and that intent was there. So I think FSG, as much as they have had criticism at times, they've never been shy from, when they feel a game-changing player is available, that they'll put that money down. And I think, you know, certainly with the Wirtz signing, I think that's what it is. I think that there was an opportunity to move for him, and they felt like he could be a game changer, and that's why they paid that much money. I think the Ekitike one is interesting. I was surprised when that sort of became their interest became sort of formalised there. It felt like it does still feel like quite a lot of money for a player who is, you know, only had one really good season in the Bundesliga, but, you know, by all accounts, the club really like him, the manager really likes him, and they feel like, you know, the way the market is now, how much the top number nines are being priced at, it's a worthwhile investment.
You talk about game changers there, Beth, and there's one real game changer, Alexander Isak. Now, we know that Liverpool made a tentative inquiry, which, the way it all came out last week, so Liverpool's interest became known. It wasn't briefed by Liverpool. It was one of those situations where it kind of helped them for it to be out, because Newcastle then rebuffed it. But obviously Alexander Isak now knows that Liverpool are serious about wanting it. Then 3 or 4 days later, Newcastle play at Celtic in the pre-season friendly. Alexander Isak doesn't play. Eddie Howe, the manager, says that it's because there's so much speculation around it, but I'm confident he'll stay. But it didn't sound very confident to me. And if you can't play in a pre-season friendly where there's no pressure whatsoever, it's just a complete kind of free hit, I just thought that was a little bit weird, and a little bit, there's 6 weeks to go in the window. Isak has said nothing. You can't turn Liverpool down. And we were just talking off air that, you know, once Nunes goes, once Chiesa goes, once Luis Diaz goes, probably to Bayern Munich, there's about 120, 130 million pounds that Liverpool could spend there. So is Alexander Isak going to be a Liverpool player by the end of the window?
I'm not making any promises whatsoever, but it's a very interesting situation. I, like you, found a lot of Eddie Howe's comments at the weekend slightly odd. And I think it would have made more of a statement from Newcastle to have Isak playing and in the squad. I understand the idea of it's maybe taking him out of the firing line a little bit, but, you know, there's more. I think it would have been more impactful for them to have been like, you know, he's here, he's our player, and having him out there. So yeah, and I did think sort of Eddie Howe, a lot of the language that he used was, you know, we're hopeful that he'll still be here. We believe that he'll still be here. It wasn't an unequivocal, we're 100%, he's not going anywhere, which I did think was interesting. It's also been interesting that, you know, despite moving for Ekitike, there hasn't been sort of a real firm, unequivocal from Liverpool, you know, we've ended our interest in Alexander Isak. Now, I'm not saying that they haven't ended the interest, but I think he's the sort of player that, any club in the world would want him. And if, and it's a big if, there was a chance that he could still move this summer, then I'm sure Liverpool will be among those clubs who are interested. Whether financially they could make it work, having signed Ekitike, I don't know. But it is certainly an interesting one to keep an eye on, because I do think sort of some of the noises coming out of Newcastle the past few days have been slightly strange.
Rob, you've covered loads of transfers, big transfers involving big clubs, and there's a certain things go on, don't they, behind the scenes that often don't get reported. And how do you read this Isaks situation? Because obviously what happened last week was a bit strange in the way that he came out and then the way he missed the game. Am I just being a little bit too cynical? Am I looking at things that aren't there, or do you think there's definitely something to you can smell a rat, is the phrase I think we say?
I agree. I agree with Beth. I just don't think that it's been handled particularly well by Newcastle, because obviously from the outside it's looked like Newcastle have been quite firm all the way, for the best part of a year probably, particularly with all the Arsenal interest in saying we're not selling him. He would cost £150 million anyway. No one's got that kind of money. Move on to a different target. I just think the way that Newcastle have handled that raises more questions than answers, and then you start thinking, well, and like you said there, it's a free hit in pre-season. Nobody cares really about these games. If he's not in the right mental place to play a pre-season game at Celtic, then that probably tells you quite a lot about where he views his own future. And how do you move on from this now? Because Newcastle, every time Eddie Howe gets in front of a camera or a journalist, all the questions are going to be about Isak. All the players in mixed zones are going to be asked about Isak. Have you spoken to him? What's he thinking? Where's he going to go? Is he going to be a Newcastle player next year? It's going to start overshadowing a lot of their pre-season. And then you get to the start of the Premier League. And is Isak going to be ready to start those games for Newcastle? If he can't play against Celtic in a pre-season game, then presumably this interest or the speculation isn't really going to go away. So is he going to be ready to play in their first game? Can he not play now until the end of the transfer window? I just thought it was a really, really odd way to handle it, because my reading of it from the outside was that, yes, there's a lot of interest in him. Obviously, Arsenal would love to have him. United would love to have him. Liverpool would probably love to have him, but no one could really afford him. So everyone just kind of move on. Well, the way that Eddie Howe has addressed it kind of suggests that there is an awful lot more to this now, and all eyes are going to be on it. I think he's blown up a story that possibly he didn't need to. I mean, look, we'd loathe to kind of give Eddie Howe advice on how to manage his squad and how to manage his play. It's obviously done what he felt was right at the time. I just think you'll know, Mark, as well, these transfer stories thrive on oxygen, don't they?
Yeah.
The more kind of oxygen you give them, the bigger they get, and it kind of, gets out of hand. And I just think the way that Eddie Howe's handled that has given it loads more oxygen now, and a load more legs. And we're talking about it on a podcast that, with Liverpool having signed Ekitike, you would assume that kind of interest has gone away now. But with the way that Newcastle have handled it, it doesn't feel like it has gone away.
Now, my sense in this is that the Liverpool interest last week, it was a kind of a strategic leak or brief, or you want to call it, and that it was almost like a signal to Isak that if you want to push for this, if you want to do with it, we're here waiting for it. Because that's what happens, We saw with Gyokeres at Sporting Lisbon, he didn't turn up for training. He decided to push for the move. Now, Isak hasn't done that with Newcastle yet, but there's so many ways that a player can force a move. And if he wants to go to Liverpool, as we know, Newcastle haven't spent a lot of money this year. They've only brought one player in. Listen, maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist, but that is my view. I think there's definitely one to watch this one. Anyway, let's move on to Man City. We know that they've been busy, not just this summer, but in January as well. They've spent £295 million all year so far. Rodri's back in the team. The signings they've made they've not been the usual Man City signings in the sense that in the past they would always go for the top shelf, the top tier signings. They used to do what Liverpool have done. They go for the best players. We know they missed out on Florian Wirtz, but Pep Guardiola said there's still business to be done. So how do you rate their business so far? Big spending, a lot of players that have got a lot to prove. What do you make of it?
I mean, I thought they did well to get the signings over the line in time for the Club World Cup. And they made a really clear distinction. I've said this before on our episode on the Club World Cup, that City kind of viewed the Club World Cup as the start of their season, not the end of it. And they wanted players in. They wanted to have them all together in that training base in Miami, to get that kind of camaraderie, to kind of understand each other, for Pep to get time to work with them on the training pitch. They're doing sort of big long sessions at Lynn University in Boca Raton. So I thought they did well to get the deals that they wanted over the line relatively quickly. I was impressed with Aït-Nouri at the Club World Cup. I thought that he was particularly good going forward. Everyone will know, how good he is from watching Wolves last season. He offers, goals and assists from left back. It's been a while since City have had a recognised left back, and it did look different with, an attacking left back in that position. Reinders, I think, will be key to what City want to do next season. They didn't really have a lot of legs in midfield last year. They looked kind of slow and sluggish, particularly without Rodri. And Reinders, in theory, will be that kind of box-to-box between Rodri and maybe another one of those attacking midfielders, whether it's Foden or Shirky or someone else. There probably is still business to be done. The position that they could do with strengthening is at right back. Obviously, Kyle Walker's gone. They've got Rico Lewis, who kind of fell out of favour a little bit last season. And they've got bit part players, the likes of Akanji, who can play there. Mateus Nunes, who's obviously a midfielder, but can play there. There has been speculation about a right back, but nothing really kind of concrete. And now they've got an issue with the goalkeeper. We spoke to Edison in America at the Club World Cup, and he was adamant that he was staying. But the speculation around his future just hasn't gone away, whether it's Saudi or now Galatasaray. City, I think, don't really want to make a change in that position. But if they have to make a change, if one of Ortega or Edison goes, they are looking at the likes of Diogo Costa at Porto and James Trafford at Burnley, obviously a player that they know really well, having come through their academy system. So there may be tweaks to their squad between now and the end of the transfer window. I wouldn't expect anything major because they've done, you've just said there, they did the major business in January and before the Club World Cup. So the squad as it is now will be the bulk of the squad going forward next season. There could still be the odd tweak here or there. With City, again, you never know. I mean, I remember a couple of summers ago, City sort of saying, we're done, we're not going to do anything else. And then 2 days later, Manuel Akanji walked through the door. So with City, you never know.
Beth, I mean, obviously Liverpool are the champions now, and over the years they've had so many battles with Man City. But do you sense that they see City as their prime rivals, or do you think Arsenal have now become the number one rivals?
I think, despite how they sort of fell off a little bit last season, it would be naive to not look at City as the main threat, because they are a force. They obviously won 4 titles on the bounce before last season. So I think they probably view them equally as Arsenal, I would say. I think City have that guile and that know-how that Arsenal don't quite yet have. So it'll be interesting. I think I'm interested by City next season because, I think they've done some smart business. I think, Aït-Nouri, as Rob said, he's a player that I've really liked at Wolves. I wouldn't have minded Liverpool going for him. So I think he's a great player. I think they've done well in the market, but they've lost a little bit of that aura that they had a couple of years ago, where you just sort of felt like, how are you going to get at this City team? How are you going to stop them from going on and winning the league? So I think there's sort of less mystique about them. They're still a very, very good team, but they're not, the formidable side that they were a couple of years back. So I'd say they're probably maybe on a par with Arsenal, and probably a lot of that as well depends on what Arsenal do in the market between now and the end of the transfer window. Obviously, looks like Gyokeres is going to come in, but I still think that Arsenal are maybe 1 or 2 players off being champions, but who knows? I could be completely wrong.
Rob, just to finish out on Man City, we know that Jack Grealish is surplus to requirements. Pep's made that pretty clear, but big fee, big wages, big reputation. I think he's 29 now, so who's going to pick up Jack Grealish? Because it will cost a tab to sign him from Man City.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the fact that he's still a Man City player tells you everything about how difficult it is for him to get a move somewhere. He has got time left on his contract. I think he's got 2 years left on his contract. He's on big wages. There've been links with the likes of Everton and West Ham, but if they were to move for someone like Grealish, you're talking about smashing the wage structure for possibly a 1-year loan, which just that kind of thing just doesn't go down well in dressing rooms. I wouldn't be surprised if Jack Grealish ends up back at City. I think Pep Guardiola has managed that situation in a different way to the way that Ruben Amorim has managed the Rashford or Garnacho at Man United, in that from right at the start, when we saw him at the Club World Cup, the first question of the first press conference was obviously about Grealish because he wasn't there. He left the door open for him to come back. Now, if you look at that situation, it's really, really clear that Pep doesn't really want him at City anymore, that he wants him to move on. but he left the door open. He said that, if a move doesn't materialise, he's more than welcome to come back. He still has a future at City, or a possible future at City. We're told that once they start training or return for pre-season training after their break, that he will be allowed to train with the squad if he's still at the club, which is different to that with the way that Amorim has handled Rashford and Garnacho. I don't think there's any problem really with Grealish in terms of the personality in the dressing room, because he's really well liked in that dressing room. I don't think the players would mind having him back. I think really it's simply that if Grealish wants to play week in, week out and wants to get in the England squad ahead of the World Cup, he needs to find a move away, because Pep has been quite clear that he just doesn't feel that Jack has got the consistency to play Saturday, Wednesday, like he did at the end of the treble season. So it's an interesting one. I don't think that there's an obvious place for Grealish to go, unless you end up going to somewhere like say Bayern Munich don't get Diaz and they're looking for someone who can play on the left hand side, and they end up going for Grealish. Obviously, a completely different player, but he could do that job. Unless Grealish wants to accept a West Ham or an Everton and take a pay cut and go for a year on loan, I think it's going to be really, really difficult for him.
Yeah, Rob, you're obviously out in the States now on another pre-season tour. I've not had the pleasure, quote unquote pleasure, of going on one of those yet. I know you two have both been around the block a few times more than me. I'll say that in the most respectful way possible. But just tell us a little bit, Rob, about your favourite pre-season stories.
The one that sticks out is 2018, and I realised I just said there that these games and these tours don't really matter, because obviously the real business starts when the Premier League starts. But in 2018, United had finished, I think they finished second under Jose, and Jose Mourinho turned up in America in LA at UCLA for the training camp, desperate basically for United to kind of build on what he thought was quite a big success the season before, but sign the players that he thought could get City and United close to City and challenge for the Premier League title. And by the time he arrived in the US, United were stuck really in the transfer market. And the minute he stepped off the plane, he was absolutely furious. And again, the first question in the first press conference was about Paul Pogba, because Paul had just won the World Cup with France. He played particularly well. And the first question was something really underarm, like, isn't it a great sign for Man United that Paul Pogba, your best player, is in his great form? He's just won the World Cup. Surely you're looking forward to working with him, and he could kind of lead United to a Premier League title. And from the minute that Jose was asked the question, he just absolutely kicked him and said, well, he's done well at the World Cup because there's no distractions, and that's the kind of football that the environment that he needs to thrive in. I'm not sure that he's really cut out for club football. We'll see. And from the minute that he said that, the kind of these dark clouds just descended on the entire Man United tour. There was issues going forward with signings. He wanted a defender. United didn't want to pay the money for a defender. There was a point where Jose pulled a few journalists out of a press conference to say that he was trying to get rid of Anthony Martial. He didn't want Anthony Martial in the squad anymore. And then 24 hours later, Ed Woodward is talking to us saying that Anthony Martial's got a great future at Man United, and they're expecting him to score all these goals and he's going to be fantastic. There was all these little kind of things and like stories that were going on all the way through the tour, to the point where we turned up in Miami for the last leg, and Jose was sat on his phone down in the lobby in front of all the journalists, screaming down the phone at someone, basically telling everyone how terrible this tour had been and how terrible the transfer business had been. And the way that the tour had gone, United never really recovered from that. The season started poorly. They couldn't string a run of wins together. And by December, the club, the team were in disarray, and Jose Mourinho was sacked. And it just shows you that, as I don't want to say meaningless, but as kind of these games are practice games. It's all about training and getting the right balance in your squad ahead of the season. But the mood on these tours really does matter. And if it doesn't go well, you find it really, really difficult to kind of get rid of that. And it can affect your season. And it certainly did that year. Jose Mourinho and the players never recovered. And by December, he was sacked, and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer had come in.
Mark, continuing the United trend, is your worst/best pre-season tour a United one?
You see, I've been around the block a bit. My first pre-season tour was 2006. I went to South Africa with United, and back in those days, I think there's 4 or 5 of us, just 4 or 5 journalists, speaking to Sir Alex Ferguson in the tunnel at Newlands. Now it's 4 or 5 club media, never mind 4 or 5 media, but things have changed. But there's a couple of stories. So first of all, I think the one that sticks out most is Louis van Gaal. Louis van Gaal's basically first First game as Man United manager was a pre-season friendly against LA Galaxy at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena in 2014. And Man United tours they're ridiculous because they're such a big club, and it's when the commercial team basically get control of the team, and they would have all sorts of, commercial activities and players being asked to drive Chevrolets through Beverly Hills, all this sort of thing, when they should have been resting. Now, Louis van Gaal wasn't happy about this. He gradually got more and more grumpy. And the team was staying in the Beverly Wilshire Hotel in Beverly Hills, which is famous for its kind of central role in Pretty Woman with Julia Roberts. So back in those days, United would basically go for the glamour of all these hotels, but it was completely unsuitable for where they were playing. They were playing 20 miles away in Pasadena, and they were training 20 miles the other direction in Carson, near LA Galaxy's ground. So we turned up at this first press conference. It took us 2 hours to get there, and United were 30 minutes late, and Van Gaal was so angry about it that he ranted at the club and said, "This is ridiculous. I'm not having this. I want you to check out of this hotel. We want a hotel near the training ground." Now, the training ground in LA was in the middle of nowhere. So basically, United booked out a motel near the LA Galaxy Stadium for the players to have an afternoon nap. So they wouldn't go back to their luxurious 5-star hotel on basically Sunset Boulevard. They were sleeping in a motel near the training ground just because Van Gaal was so angry with the demands on his players. And that kicked on. But I mean, the year before, it was David Moyes' one and only summer tour with United. He went to the Far East in Australia. And David Moyes had been to Australia before with Everton. He'd been to Sydney with Everton. And obviously Everton at the time had Tim Cahill in the side, who was, probably Australia's, apologies for the interruption there. He was probably Australia's most famous player. So he took him for a walk on Bondi Beach, nice little relaxing walk. He thought he'd do the same with Man United. Now, he was told that when you do this sort of off-the-cuff thing with United, you have to let the police know and the security team know because it's a different level. But David Moyes didn't quite grasp it, so he took his squad and walked to Bondi Beach. Within minutes, they were mobbed by fans, and the players had to basically run to a bar on the other side of Bondi Beach and wait upstairs in the rooftop bar until the Man United security team came along to rescue them. So pre-season tours can be quite chaotic, especially with Man United, because as Rob knows, it's despite the fact they're on their knees right now in terms of where they are as a football team, as a football club, they are still massive. And I remember being in Seoul in South Korea where maybe 100 fans were sleeping outside the hotel just to get a glimpse of the players. So it opens your eyes to how big Man United, Liverpool are. I mean, I was in Melbourne one year when Liverpool played to 100,000 fans at the MCG. Crazy times, but it shows you how big the Premier League is outside the UK and how big certainly United and Liverpool are. It's crazy, really, but it's a great tour.
Can I just ask, Mark, that Louis van Gaal story, talking about the glitz and glamour of Man United and these tours, that game in Pasadena, how did you get there?
Oh, dear, here we go. So basically, we were staying in a hotel.
Tell listeners.
No, it's a good story, but I don't want to kind of take all the time on telling my story. Basically, we were staying in a hotel near Marina del Rey on the beach, which again was totally impractical for games in the Rose Bowl, about 40 minutes away. So it was decided that we should, get a minibus to take us to the game. So one of the guys had the responsibility of going to the front desk at the hotel and saying, "Look, can you book us a minibus to take us to the Rose Bowl tonight?" So yeah, no problem. So we arranged this minibus to take us to the game. We're waiting outside, and this stretch limo turns up, and somebody booked a stretch limo rather than a minibus. And this stretch limo, when you get inside it, it basically had disco lights on it, black leather seats, drinks and everything like that. So we turn up at the game late to the traffic, and we all get out of this stretch limo. And on the way back, it was the same story again. We've got the stretch limo through the streets of Los Angeles playing, our favourite songs on the iPod. It was great, actually, but it wasn't really befitting a group of journalists. We should really have been in like the 18 van rather than a stretch limo.
Did anyone stop you and ask for an autograph when you got out?
Don't get
not on this occasion, no. Let's not go there. Let's not go there. But anyway, we're gonna finish this off by throwing to James, who's had a couple of eventful trips to Chelsea during the summer.
Probably my favourite tour story would be the gradual unravelling of Thomas Tuchel as Chelsea manager. The club had organised a should we say, quite aggressive pre-season tour to the States, where they started on the West Coast and they went across every time zone, playing multiple matches. I think they were there for about 2 weeks, maybe even a little bit longer. And Tuchel just couldn't quite believe the demands that were being placed on him and on the players. And his press conferences became sort of increasingly irate. Behind the scenes, he was getting frustrated at the level of interference he felt was coming from the ownership, from the details about how they were training, to players he was being offered and repeatedly offered, even though he
he'd already said no to some of those players. And it sort of gradually unravelled over the time in the States to the point where he could barely hide his contempt by the end. He admitted that they were nowhere near ready for the start of the season, and really it was no surprise that shortly after the window closed that Tuchel left Stamford Bridge. He was sacked by the ownership, and anybody who was on the tour that summer will have known it was a long time coming.
So thanks for listening to our stories of our yesteryears on tours. It's been an interesting ride, and we'll be back soon, hopefully before the season starts, with more news on the Football Reporter.